Do you want to learn how you can hook up your React front end with your Appsync APIs and Cognito? In this video, that is exactly what I'm going to teach you how to do. Hi guys, my name is Sam with Complete Coding, where our aim is to make you into the best possible AWS and serverless developers that you can be. In this video, we'll be looking at how we can connect our React app up to Appsync and get it all working. We'll also be looking at React context and how we can share the data through different layers of our components without having to pass everything around. So React context is actually quite an advanced topic and is very complicated to explain. I've given a very brief overview in this video, but if you want to learn how to do it yourselves, I'd recommend finding a tutorial specifically for this. There are loads of really good YouTube videos, as well as written articles that can help you understand this process. So let's jump into the code and we can see the progress that we've made in the last week. In our app, we're going to start by having a look at our login process. So if we scroll down to our return statement inside app.tsx, we find the not logged in check. And if they're not logged in, then they get to this set of routes. So if the root is /, we send them to home. And if it is /sign-in, we send them to a sign-in component. If we open up this sign-in component, we have some state, some error messages, and then we have a sign-in function. And this sign-in function calls auth.signin, where auth is a set of functions provided by Amplify, where we can just pass the email and password, and that will actually work with Cognito and tell us if that user is valid, validate the password, and if that all works, it's then going to give us back a user. So if they call a sign-in and it all works, we're going to use history to push a / into the history. And what this is going to do is it's going to reroute the user to the URL of /. This is because when they log in, we don't want them to stay on the sign-in page that they're currently on. And after that, we call the onSignin function, which is passed into this component. And we'll have a look at that in just a second. Before we do that, let's have a look at the actual React code. So here we have a grid with the normal use color mode value to allow our color mode switching between light and dark mode. We have our color mode switcher and the login heading. Then if there's an error message, we're going to show it here. Below that, we've then got a input for email address, as well as password. But as well as in this password input, we've used an input group, and inside we've also put an input element right, which is going to show up an extra part of the input box on the right hand side. And what we're going to do on there is we're going to either show or hide the password. We'll see that in just a second. And at the bottom, we have a button saying next with the sign-in function that we are going to call when this is clicked, which we looked at just before. And finally, a button saying I need to register, which links to register. This just saves them having to go back to the home page to then go in to register if they've accidentally clicked on sign-in. So this on sign-in, if we go back to our app.tsx, we see here that we are passing in the function of assessed logged in state. And if we have a look at that, all that does is checks if there is a current authenticated user and either sets the logged in state to true or sets it to false. This will then change the logged in value, which will, back in our ternary statement here, instead of setting this group of routing, it will now use this group of routing. So that's how we are separating logged in and not logged in users. So let's have a look at how this all looks. So inside our app, obviously you have the home page and the color switching. If we click on log in, we now get to the login page with the two inputs and a next button. If I was to enter a gibberish password and I want to see that password, I can click this show icon just here. And when I do that, it changes to hide and I can now read the password. This is useful when you're having people sign up, but by default, you should always hide the password whenever possible. I'm just going to now delete this password, and I've got a saved set of user credentials, which are the ones I manually set up to test all of the APIs, and then I hit next. What you can see is we have now logged in, and you can get a bit of a preview of the actual app. So let's look back into our code and see what has happened now. So now that we've logged in, we are getting this set of routes. Because we forced the app to go to /, it goes to this route, which then actually redirects them straight to posts. That's because the posts page is where I want the users to start their experience when they are logged in, and that means they end up looking at the posts view. If we go in here, we can see that we have some state with posts and a company. Now we'll talk about this company context in a little while, but for now all we need to know is that when you log in, there is a selected company, and we use this effect so that whenever that selected company is passed in, we get the post page. This get post page is going to take the selected company, and if there isn't a company selected, it's just going to do an early return. That's because we really need that selected company to pass into this request. And here is our first ever API request. So again, we're using API from the Amplify suite and doing api.graphql. And this is a function which takes a query and some variables. So the query that I'm using here is going to be the get posts for company. And the variables are going to be a company ID, which is selected company.company ID, and the next token. That's because if I've already loaded one page and I want to get the second page, say I've scrolled to the bottom of the posts that I want to view, this can be used to get the second page. Based on this, we get a response data, and we then get the new posts from get posts for company dot posts, and we basically append that onto the end of the original posts array and set that. Also, if there is a next token, we pass that into set next token, so that if we carry on scrolling, we will get the third page after that. So that is our logic for getting data from the API. And after this, I'll talk about the get posts for company and how I populated that. If we look at the actual code, the top section will look pretty much the same as before, where we have a grid a color mode switcher container with a heading of posts. And then the actual posts themselves in this view are very simple. It's just a vertical stack where we map over each post and pass that as a new component. If we have a look at the post component, so this is a single post, and I'll actually show you this first. So this is the whole posts page from the top of the nav all the way up to the top, and a single post is just this one single white section. We've got this circle with the name of the group and the color, followed by either the title or the date of the post. So for example, this one has a title, and then whether it is a scheduled post or a group schedule is stored here. At the moment, all of these posts are group schedule, but there is actually logic to show the date there if it is a scheduled post. One other thing is to make this more like LinkedIn, I've said that this text area here is limited to a certain number of lines, as it is when you scroll through LinkedIn. And I've added this See More button here, which is almost the same as this layout in LinkedIn. Not quite perfect, but if you click that, it now expands so you can see the full text message. So now that we know what it looks like, let's have a look at how we've done that inside our code. So here, where I said it can either be a group schedule, a scheduled post where we want to show the date, it could also be a draft. So here we're using the value of info for that position, defaulting it to get to group schedule, and if there's a TTL on the post, we want to set it to be the local string of that TTL date, and if it is a draft, then we need to set it to be draft. As well as that, we then go down to our container. Here we have a horizontal stack where we have the avatar. This avatar is going to be the circle that has the name of the group in it. And here we set the background to be post.group.color or black. We always at the moment set the color of the text to be white, but in the future I want to add some extra logic so that we know there's enough contrast between the group color and the text color. And then in here we need to get the initials. Here's some relatively complex logic. All this is doing is trying to make sure that the name inside this circle actually fits. If it's too long, so for example, if you've got more than 10 characters in the name, then it needs to be wrapped onto two separate lines, and that is what is happening with this logic. After that, it gets pretty simple. You have a title and info, which is the title and the info, whether it's group schedule or the date it is scheduled for. And then if we go down, we see we have the text. Now we have two options for this. We have the text here, which contains the text, but with this text component, you can set a maximum number of lines. So here, if it's expanded, we set that to undefined, so it shows all of the lines. But if it's not expanded, we set it to 5. That's what I showed earlier, where there was the ... at the bottom of the post, which showed that there was more text in there. And this show more is going to allow us to click that button, and that will set expanded to be true, which will remove this number of lines requirement, and it'll also get rid of that show more button. So that is basically the post. So now that we've looked at the components that we were using, we want to go back to our posts view and talk about the two things that I said I would talk about. Those two things are the get post for company query, and where does that come from, as well as this company context. I'll start with the query. So if we go into our source, I've added a new set of code in GraphQL with queries and mutations. If we have a look at this queries.ts, in here we have a set of functions, and that function equals query get my user or query get company. And these will align exactly with the queries and mutations that we've added to our GraphQL. The way that I know that is I didn't actually write all of these queries and mutations. As you can see on the right hand side, this is actually quite a large file. So it's 300 lines for the queries, and for the mutations it's 260. So I didn't actually write all of that. What I did is I went into my API and to my GraphQL schema, and I used the amplify tool called generate code. And what that did is that actually generated that file with all of those methods. This is really useful because writing them manually is a bit of a pain. But with this tool, and I'll link the exact code in the description below, you can generate as much boilerplate as you want. There were a couple of things I needed to do. So by default, you have to pass in a depth to which you want to query, and it will actually query that and get every single possible value all back for you. So for example, in get my user, it had 2 layers deep. So it got the user ID, email, and companies, and then it had companies, but it didn't actually get any values from each of the companies. This was a bit weird, but that's because it was set to 2 layers deep. So I had to explicitly say I wanted the company ID, name, and logo URL whenever I do a get user. Another example, if I scroll down to get posts for company, in here we have a set of posts, and because again I set it to having a default depth of 2, posts and post ID, company ID, group, date, title, context, is draft, and TTL were all included, but anything nested further than that wasn't. One thing that I did want was the group, so I had to add these extra fields as more nested values that I wanted to get. And one of the weird ones that I didn't expect was it brought back context, but not context.text, even though that is technically part of the same object in Dynamo. This was treated as a separate layer. So obviously I want the text of the post, so I had to add that in. So that is how I've got all of the GraphQL queries and mutations. And from the boilerplate, I'm able to just slightly modify, add or remove some of the fields, but having somewhere good to start is a lot easier than starting from scratch. And the next thing I want to talk about is, if we look in our posts, is this use context process. And I have used company context, but I also have a user context. And I think I'm going to start with user context. So I've created a folder called context, and in there I have a user context file. And what I need to do is first create some context using react.createContext. and I then need a way of providing that context. So here we have state with a user and the ability to set the user. Whenever this provider is called or used, I use a use effect and I call GraphQL with getMyUser. This works in exactly the same way as getPostForCompany, and that returns my user, and then I set that user with all of the data I need. With that, you can then get the provider component from the context, and you return the provider with the value that you want to share to all of the children. In this case, it is the user that I'm sharing to all of the children, which is stored in my state. And that now means that any of the children I pass into the user provider will have access to the user. See how this actually works inside app.tsx. I actually use it just like this. If they are logged in, I then wrap all of the routing inside the user provider. This means that any component in here could use the context of user context and then access basically any of the user data that they want to. The way I've actually done that is inside the company context, I do something similar where I have the details of the currently selected company and also a function that can be called from anywhere in the app called setSelectedCompany, which can change the company that the user is working with. Again, this is just using React State, and then this exports the provider with selected company and set selected company. This then has all of the children, so whenever this is used, it passes all of those children the ability to see the selected company and also change the selected company if needed. And that's exactly what we've seen inside our posts. Here we use context, taking the company context, and access the selected company. This is really powerful because I've not had to manually pass the selected company into this posts object component, and I could use this selected company anywhere in the app where, let me go back to app.tsx, anywhere in the app that is inside any of these components, no matter how far nested it is, I'll still be able to use that context and access both the selected company, the user, and the ability to change the selected company. In this video, we've done quite a lot over the last week. We have added the login for our app and used the Amplify APIs to allow us to both log in using the auth methods, as well as then actually access our own APIs using, again, the API methods from Amplify. This has allowed us to get our own user, as well as get our posts for the company that we are working with. We've also looked at adding context to the app to be able to share certain bits of data, such as the user and the company that is currently selected, around basically the whole app. This is much easier than passing the actual data into props on every single component, as you can access it wherever you want, no matter how nested it may be. In the next video, what we're going to be doing is setting up our registration process. This will involve creating a new registration screen, but also working with LinkedIn to allow a user to enter their username and password for LinkedIn and verify that the Post Planning Guru app is allowed to do posts on their behalf. This is a fundamental part of the whole application, so it's going to be really interesting to get that all working. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in next week's video.